The Law of Empowerment, Chapter 12. Only secure leaders give power to others. Nearly everyone has heard of Henry Ford, the revolutionary automobile industry innovator and legend in American business history. In 1903, he co-founded the Ford Motor Company with the belief that the future of the automobile lay in putting it within the reach of the average American worker. Ford said, "I will build a motor car for the multitude. It will be large enough for the family, but small enough for the individual to run and care for it. It will be constructed of the best materials, by the best men to be hired, after the simplest design that modern engineering can devise. But it will be so low in price that no man making a good salary will be unable to own one, and enjoy with his family the blessings of hours of pleasure in God's great open spaces." Henry Ford carried out the vision with the Model T, and it changed the face of the 20th century American life. By 1914, Ford was producing nearly 50% of all automobiles in the United States. The Ford Motor Company looked like an American success story. The less known chapter of the story. However, all of Ford's story is not about positive achievement, and one reason is that he didn't embrace the law of empowerment. Henry Ford was so in love with his Model T that he never wanted to change or improve it, nor did he want anyone else to tinker with it. One day, when a group of his designers surprised him by presenting him with a prototype of an improved model, Ford furiously ripped its doors off the hinges and proceeded to destroy the car with his bare hands. For almost 20 years, the Ford Motor Company offered only one design, the Model T, which Henry Ford had personally developed. It wasn't until 1927 that he finally grudgingly agreed to offer a new car to the public. The company produced the Model A, but it was incredibly far behind its competitors in technical innovations. Despite its early head start and the incredible lead over its competitors, the Ford Motor Company's market share kept shrinking. By 1931, it was down to only 28%, a little more than half of what it produced 17 years earlier. Henry Ford was the antithesis of an empowering leader. He continually undermined his leaders and looked over the shoulders of his people. He even created a sociological department within Ford Motor Company to check up on his employees and direct their private lives. As time went by, he became more and more eccentric. He once went into his accounting office and tossed the company's books into the streets, saying, "Just put all the money we take in a big barrel," and I don't know what that means exactly. "And when a shipment of material comes in, reach into the barrel and take out enough money to pay for it." Perhaps Ford's most peculiar dealings were with his executives, especially his son, Edsel. The younger Ford had worked at the company since he was a boy. As Henry became more eccentric, Edsel worked harder to keep the company going. If it weren't for Edsel, the Ford Motor Company probably would have gone out of business in the 1930s. Henry eventually gave Edsel the presidency of the company, but at the same time he undermined his son. Further, whenever a promising leader was rising up in the company, Henry tore him down. As a result, the company kept losing its best executives. The few who stayed did so because they figured that suddenly old Henry would die, and Edsel would finally take over and set things right. But that's not what happened. In 1943, Edsel died at age 49. Another Henry Ford. Edsel's oldest son, the 26-year-old Henry Ford II, quickly left the Navy so that he could return to Dearborn, Michigan, and take over the company. At first, he faced opposition from his grandfather's entrenched followers, but within 2 years he gathered the support of several key people, received the backing of the board of directors. His mother controlled 41% of Ford Motor Company's stock, and convinced his grandfather to step down so that he could become president in his place. Young Henry was taking over a company that hadn't made a profit in 15 years. At that time, it was losing $1 million a day. The young president knew he was in over his head, so he went out to find leaders. Fortunately, the first group actually approached him. Colonel Charles Tex, Thornton headed a team of 10 men who had worked together at the War Department during World War II. Their contribution to Ford Motor Company was substantial. In the years to come, the group produced 6 company vice presidents and 2 presidents. The second influx of leadership came with the entrance of Ernie Breech, an experienced General Motor executive and the former president of Bendix Aviation. Young Henry hired him to be Ford's executive vice president, a position second to Henry's, with the expectation that he would take command and turn the company around. He succeeded. Breech quickly brought in more than 150 outstanding executives from General Motors, and by 1949, Ford Motor Company was on a roll. In that year, the company sold more than 1 million Fords, Mercurys, and Lincolns, the best sales since the Model A. Who's the boss? If Henry Ford II had lived by the law of empowerment, the Ford Motor Company might have grown enough to eventually overtake General Motors and become the #1 car company again, but only secure leaders are able to give power to others, and Henry felt threatened. The success of Tex Thornton, Ernie Breech, and Louis Crusoe, a legendary GM executive whom Breech had brought into the company, made Henry worry about his own place at Ford. His position was based not on influence, but on his name and his family's control of company stock. Little box. The best executive is the one who has sense enough to pick good men to do what he wants done, and self-restraint enough to keep from meddling with them while they do it. Theodore Roosevelt. What was Henry's solution? He began pitting one top executive against another. First, Thornton against Crusoe. Then, after Thornton was fired, he turned Crusoe against Breech. Ford biographers Peter Collier and David Horowitz described the second Henry Ford's method this way. Henry's instinct for survival manifested itself as craftiness combined with a kind of weakness. He had endowed Crusoe with the power to do virtually whatever he wished, by withdrawing his grace from Breech and bestowing it on his lieutenant. He had made antagonists of the 2 men most vital to Ford's success. While Henry had lost confidence in Breech, however, he had left him officially in charge because this increased his own maneuverability, and as Crusoe's official superior, Breech could be useful if Henry wanted to keep Crusoe in check. This became a pattern in the leadership of Henry Ford II. Any time an executive gained power and influence, Henry undercut the person's authority by moving him to a position with less clout, supporting the executive's subordinates, or publicly humiliating him. This maneuver continued all the days Henry II was at Ford. As one Ford president, Lee Iacocca, commented after leaving the company, Henry Ford, as I would learn firsthand, had a nasty habit of getting rid of strong leaders. Iacocca says that Henry Ford II once described his leadership philosophy to him. Years before Iacocca himself became its target, Ford said, "If a guy works for you, don't let him get too comfortable. Don't let him get cozy or set in his ways. Always do the opposite of what he expects. Keep your people anxious and off balance." What does it mean to lead well? Both Henry Fords failed to abide by the law of empowerment. Rather than identifying leaders, building them up, giving them resources, authority, and responsibility, and then turning loose to achieve, they alternately encouraged and undermined their best people. Their insecurity made it impossible for them to give power to others. Ultimately, it undermined their personal leadership potential, created havoc in the lives of the people around them, and damaged their organization. If leaders want to be successful, they have to be willing to empower others. I like the way President Theodore Roosevelt stated it. The best executive is the one who has sense enough to pick good men to do what he wants done, and the self-restraint enough to keep from meddling with them while they do it. To lead others, well, we must help them to reach their potential. That means being on their side, encouraging them, giving them power, and helping them to succeed. That's not traditionally what we're taught about leadership. What were the 2 leadership games we were taught as kids? King of the hill and follow the leader. What was the object of King of the Hill? To knock other people down so that you can be the leader. And what's the point in follow the leader? You do things you know followers can't do to separate yourself from them and make yourself look more powerful. The problem with those games is that to win, you have to make all of the other people lose. The games are based on insecurity and are opposite of the way to raise up leaders. When I travel to developing countries, I am made especially aware of how alien the idea of empowerment can be to emerging leaders. In cultures where you have to fight to make something of yourself, the assumption often is that you need to fight others to maintain your leadership. But that reflects a scarcity mindset. The truth is that if you give some of your power away to others, there is still plenty to go around. When I teach the law of empowerment in emerging countries, I usually ask a volunteer to come up so that I can show visually what happens when a leader tries to keep others down instead of raising them up. I ask the volunteer to stand in front of me, and I put my hand on his shoulders. Then I begin pushing him down. The lower I want to push him, the more I have to bend down to do it. As I push him lower, I go lower. That's the same way it is in leadership. To keep others down, you have to go down with them. And when you do that, you lose any power to lift others up. In the little box it says, leading well is not about enriching yourself, it's about empowering others. Barriers to empowerment. Leading well is not about enriching yourself, it's about empowering others. Leadership analysts Lynn McFarland, Larry Sen, and John Childress say that the empowerment leadership model shifts away from the position power to people power, within which all people are given leadership roles so that they can contribute to their fullest capacity. Only empowered people can reach their potential. When a leader can't or won't empower others, he creates barriers within the organization that followers cannot overcome. If the barriers remain long enough, then the people give up and stop trying, or they go away to another organization where they can maximize their potential. When leaders fail to empower others, it is usually due to three main reasons. The number one barrier to empowerment, desire for job security. The number one enemy of empowerment is the fear of losing what we have. Weak leaders worry that if they help subordinates, they themselves will become dispensable. But the truth is that the only way to make yourself indispensable is to make yourself dispensable. In other words, if you're able to continually empower others and help them develop so that they become capable of taking over your job, you will become so valuable to that organization that you become indispensable. That's a paradox of the law of empowerment. What if I work myself out of a job by empowering others, you may ask, and my superiors don't recognize my contribution? That can happen in the short term, but if you keep raising leaders and empowering them, you will develop a pattern of achievement, excellence, and leadership that will be recognized and rewarded if the teams you lead always seem to succeed. People will figure out that you are leading them well. Little box, the number one enemy of empowerment is the fear of losing what we have. The number two barrier to empowerment, resistance to change. Nobel Prize winning author John Steinbeck asserted, "It is the nature of man as he grows older to protest against change, particularly change for the better." By its very nature, empowerment brings constant change because it encourages people to grow and innovate. Change is the price of progress. That's not always easy to live with. Most people don't like change. That's a fact. Yet one of the most important responsibilities of leaders is to continually improve their organizations. As a leader, you must train yourself to embrace change, to desire it, to make a way for it. Effective leaders are not only willing to change, they become change agents. The number three barrier to empowerment, lack of self-worth. John Pierce observed, "You can't lead a cavalry charge if you think you look funny on a horse." Self-conscious people are rarely good leaders. They focus on themselves, worrying how they look, what others think, whether they're liked. They can't give power to others because they feel that they have no power themselves. And you can't give what you don't have.